So today I am going to walk you through a character cookie. This is one of the more detailed cookies that I would offer, but I thought it would be fun to take you through the whole process of it with me. So this cookie, as with all of the cookies, you have to start off with your base. That's going to give you a nice even coat. So what I'm doing right here is flooding the cookie. This consistency is going to be a little more runnier than what you would put on the outside so that it holds the icing in place. We're going to use my cookie scribe, and I'm going to move that icing around so it gets all over the cookie and it smooths itself out when it dries. Before we put anything on top though, it is going to crust over for a few hours. So now we are moving on to the detailed part of the cookie. I'm going to use my projector, which I will link below in the description. This is going to give me that outline because if we're being honest, I cannot freehand these characters. This was a fun little throwback to my childhood, so I wanted to make sure the cookie was good. So I am just going to outline the characters here, and then once after that, we can go and fill them in. So when you are filling in these cookies, you are going to want to do maybe parts that are touching separately. So the legs of him, I'm using a thicker consistency because I want them to stand out from Mike's body. So I'm going to do those first, and then I'm going to move on to his body after. With this one, I did put a little bit of icing, like you see that blob in the middle. What that does is when this icing hardens, it's not going to cave in and create like a crater within the icing, or crater. That way it hardens over and there's no like indents in the icing. It just makes it look a lot more professional when we get to the end. So now I'm going to move on to Sully. So what you see is that we are going to ice different parts of his body. So I'm going to start with his stomach area because he actually doesn't have any spots on his stomach. And then from here, I'm going to move on to a different part. So I'm going to go to his eyebrows because I want everyone to see the difference between the different parts of his body. Same goes for Boo, so I'm going to do her hair, like the pigtail part of her hair, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to her face. Now, she's pretty small on this cookie, so I'm really going to use my cookie scribe to manipulate that icing into how I want it to go. Because it is small, this little area is going to be really hard to perfect. This is just a random technique I'm using for her arms as well because unfortunately I had cut my icing bag too wide, so I had to kind of figure out a way to get her arms on there without it being too much icing. Like I said before, we're now going to skip to her pants so that there's no icing bleed and you can really see the difference between the different parts of her clothes. Now that we have let Sully's arm crust over for a few minutes, or his body crust over for a few minutes, I'm going to move on to his arm. As you can see, you can kind of now see that difference, and his arm is standing out from his stomach, and it's not going to kind of mold together, so you can really see that outline, and it's going to make him come to life. But of course with Sully, on his arm, he is now going to have his dots. So I'm going to use a wet on wet technique here. I'm going to add some of those purple dots to him. And of course, they're not all circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back with my cookie scribe and I am going to kind of just move that color around so that they're all unique to him. Same thing here. We're going to move on to his legs. And we're just going to get that technique going. So now I'm going to move back to Boo's hair just because everything up there has dried a little bit. She is very small, like I mentioned, so her facial features are going to be pretty simple when we get to that point, just because you can't do a huge amount on something small like that. So right now we're just gonna do her shirt, we're gonna finish up her outfits, and then now we can move on to Sully's face as well. So you can see he kind of has that chin outline. Like I said before, we're gonna make sure that you can really see that so that his face stands out from the rest of his body. He does have a couple spots on his face, so we'll do a couple of those as well. So now we kind of get to the fun part of it. We're going to start adding some of those details in. We're going to start with his little claws here on his feet, and of course Sully's horns as well. And then from there we're just going to finish him off with that one last part of his body. Some people might do this differently. I do a wet on wet technique for his spots. Some people might leave circles here and there so that they can add the purple in later where there's no icing. I don't think there's really any wrong or right method to this. This is how I would do it on this type of character because the detail is so small. But on the other hand, I do use the other method for different cookies if it's a larger space. So like I said, you can really do it either way. It's really just about finding what works best for you. So as we finish up his body, this is where we're going to go into those facial features of all the characters, and this is really going to make or break the cookie in my opinion for what it's going to look like in the end. So of course we're going to start with Mike's one eye. This one was kind of fun to do because he does have a green outline to his eye color, but it's a little bit different than the green that his body is. So we're going to start with that little eye, and then we're just going to add a different shade of green to give him that eye color. That way his eye kind of pops out more and it looks more realistic. What I'm doing here is I am just moving that icing around because I wasn't too happy with my circle. Of course, he does have a small little smile, but to top off that smile, he has some teeth. So we're gonna get those teeth in place for him, and then he is gonna be all good to go on the cookie. So we're gonna kind of let him dry, put some finishing touches on, and he is all done. Now, for Sully, we kind of have the same thing. He's got his two eyes. We'll add little polka dots for his pupils. And then he does have a fairly big nose, so we'll add the nose, and then just a little smile and a couple teeth for him. His is harder to add too much detail just because his face is smaller overall on this cookie. Now, final touches. Obviously, Sully is like a monster, a bear, whatever he is. So I'm using a fun little technique where I'm adding fur to him, or what appears to be fur. So I'm just putting a bit of my flooding icing onto the cookie, and then I'm going back with a paintbrush and I'm kind of just dabbing at it. That way it's giving it that textured look, and it just kind of brings that cookie to life.